All right. I believe we are live. Good morning, Steve. How are you?
Good morning. Good to see you.
And good evening to our guest, Scriv. How about you?
Hello,
How are you doing over there?
hello. I'm doing great. Thanks for
Uh,
having me.
no, first off, thank you for joining us. It's very rarely that we can talk someone and actually join Steve and I in our, well, it's not morning for you, but it's our Sunday morning coffee clutch where Steve and I kind of pump each other's egos up to with the tabletop role playing game creation and material, and just basically have a little bitch session about the state of the union as far as nerd and geek culture goes.
That sounds like a fantastic
Yeah,
use of a Sunday morning.
exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
to a certain extent, every fanboy is angry, and so, but we try to be the lightest bit of anger as we can. So we love
But you know
everything.
what? That anger can fuel creation and
Exactly,
progress in different
and that
ways,
is what
right?
we're doing here. We are roaming the labyrinth of creativity with mazes and muses. So, Scriv, I mean, I told you why we wanted you on here, but tell our three viewers what you're doing here.
Hello, everyone. I am Scriv the Bard in all social media platforms. I am a cultural psychologist by trade. I have been writing and designing games, specifically family friendly games, for, goodness, about 5, 6 years now. And been in the field of cultural psychology for about a decade. Starting to feel old now. Now the gray hairs are starting to make sense.
If it makes you feel better, I turn 55 tomorrow. So,
You do not. Oh my gosh!
yeah,
It's your birthday.
tomorrow. Yes, sir.
Happy early
Thank
birthday!
you.
That's amazing.
Um,
um, yeah, I'm excited to be here and talk about specifically cultural sensitivity reading and editing in game creation.
and that's why we have you here, because Steve and I are cultural clouts when it comes to sensitivity. Well, no.
Oh
Claude.
no!
Claude. Yeah.
Um,
Well, I think it was just the idea that being that coming from very similar perspectives, Dan and I. I mean, we won't we our history was that we worked together when Dan was an editor on Star Trek in comic book publishing, and I was the artist on the series, and we both come from our backgrounds are very similar. I mean, I think regionally very different, but culturally, we might as well be cycloptic. We basically have one perspective, and so that's why it was like so, and we try to create inclusive work. We try to create work. We try to be thoughtful, and
Hmm.
but there was just so many things that like you just can't do without a second perspective. And the why and we were talking about how important it was, and how some of the major publishers in gaming often fall on their faces because they're just not uh, running it by people. Like you
Yeah.
think if they just asked a second person what how to do, what do you think of this, or how is this coming across? How am I being perceived?
Hmm.
They could avoid so many problems. So it was part of that conversation, specifically Wizards of the Coast and their kind of ham-handed rollout of the Hidozi that Dan was immediately like, okay, let's talk to someone who knows way more about this than we do.
Well, I am flattered and very happy to nerd out about this anytime.
That's great.
Now, the history, let's see. I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons for some 46 years now, and all editions, all variations from the back in the early or mid 70s, late 70s to now. By no means am I an expert, and I keep reiterating that I am not a Dungeons and Dragons expert. I've taken out of the game what I like, and I've forgotten more about D&D than I currently use. So it's not. I'm not an expert. I'm not a rules lawyer. I'm not a gatekeeper by any means. I love Dungeons and Dragons, and I have my entire life for the most part. So, but I do come from a very old school. That's my origin story. I was a bunch of, middle class white kids playing Dungeons and Dragons on the dining room table. Um, and with that, growing up and continuing to play Dungeons and Dragons with the same group of people, it sort of stuck that way. Um, it was very. I mean, I watched Stranger Things, and I'm like, yeah, that's us, except we didn't have a black friend for the most part. So what I'm and I've seen D&D grow, especially with the fifth edition and the introduction of with the third edition of third party material and a lot of different backgrounds and cultures and sexual orientation and religions have become contributing to the Dungeons and Dragons as we know it now. But there's also a lot of creators who have, let's say, for lack of a better term, borrowed cultural aspects for their creations, and they may not be doing it right. And so it's kind of building a rift between the newer generation D&D players and the older generation of D&D players, where one is perceived as, mutating the game, while another is perceived as gatekeeping the game. Mm-hmm. So what we need you, Scriv, to do is solve all the problems and work it out.
Well, I'm glad someone finally asked me. I'm ready. Let's do it.
I'm taking notes.
Oh, goodness. No pressure, right?
Right.
I think you've hit the nail on the head when it comes to this. I'll say the beginnings of this cultural rift within the gaming community. And the interesting thing about culture, and we talked about this a little bit before the stream began as well, it's more than costumes. It's more than language. It is more than, maybe specific behaviors. It's a myriad of all of those different things. So when it comes to like a cultural analysis type of thing, which ideally would be one of the first steps if you want to learn about a culture and then maybe incorporate elements that are inspired by that culture into your game. You're looking at, obviously, like the language, you're looking at belief systems, you're looking at economy, you're looking at politics, you're looking at history of peace or conflict or growth. You're looking at geography, because of course, a culture of landlocked farmers are going to have a very different, or a community of landlocked farmers are going to have very different cultural nuances compared to a community of fishermen. So all of these different things come into play. The way we think about time, even the way we think about gender and roles, how we see ourselves, how we see the rest of the world, how we think the rest of the world should see us. It can be a very complex thing to navigate, and it can sound very overwhelming. If you are entering this kind of thought process, this kind of exercise anew, going into creating your game, because creating a game, whether you're creating a homebrew setting or trying to design a new system, that can be overwhelming enough. Right. there can be a lot that goes into there. And I got my start with writing and game design doing different homebrew D&D content and creating this world and getting all excited about it. But as soon as you start to dig in a little bit deeper and you go, hold on, I didn't think about this or this or this. So you add cultural analysis on top of that, and you've got quite a daunting task ahead of you. And it can definitely feel that way. So when it comes to bringing other minds into that process, that can certainly help, because we want to see these different products, these different stories be inclusive and varied and diverse in every sense of the world, or every sense of the word. But we also tend to be very protective of our content.
Right.
Like writing your story with whether it's by yourself or with some trusted people, that's like your baby. You have created it. You have given it a life. You're helping it grow, and you're cultivating. And it's very intimidating. And I will say it from experience too. It's very intimidating to throw it out there and say, hey, what do you think of this? Can you help me make it better? Ooh, that's opening yourself up to potential wounding, right?
Yeah, I don't want to do my homework. I've got this cool ninja katana that's magic because of the jade goddess of sins and greed, and I just want to throw that out there because it's awesome. It's a bitchin' sword. I mean,
and it sounds like a bitchin' sword, but the way we present those different things, and that was a great example. And I'm not saying this to pick on that example, but I've seen that collection of words almost verbatim in other media out there. Right. If you're talking about the Jade Throne, the Jade Mountains, greed, intrigue, lies, it's also about the way we associate things as well. Right. So I'll speak briefly about not even like D&D or anything like that, but a past game system that I had the good fortune of being able to consult on. You can have all these different cultures represented, but what attributes are you connecting to those different cultures and how do they compare to what is seen as the majority, what is seen as the good kingdom, you know? Is
Right.
that just becoming a parallel of white European colonization or colonial powers, and everyone else's mystique and the exotic, but also somehow more devious and treacherous or less advanced? It's
Right.
about that juxtaposition of things as well. I could go off so many rabbit holes and tangents with
Oh,
this.
we've got an hour, so. But I'm just going to throw things out as they come to my mind as you throw this out. I mean, but that's what makes some of these stories good and fun, is the mysterious race or the
Yeah.
magical land, you know, being seen from the, let's just say, homogenized, you know, outsider or insider, depending on the point of view.
Mm.
How can we, you know, still remain culturally sensitive? Because I mean, we're going to borrow from elements of either history or as perceived history. I mean, it's just, I'm not going to, you know, what's right. You know, there are no, you know, no Holocaust deniers here, but I'm just saying, you know, different people have perceived history a different way, and it's not always flattering. And it may not always be correct.
Mm-hmm.
But damn it, if some of these elements do not make good storytelling.
So it is possible. Absolutely. You want, especially when it comes to like epic adventures, right? You want to see that struggle between good and evil. And I'll say this, working with like multi-generational players as well, you don't always want gray area. I think gray area is fantastic, and it's fun to explore, and it's engaging, and it draws you in, so you don't really know, like, oh no, who is the good guy now? But to some degree, you want to have that comfort of knowing for sure, right? And figure out what that struggle is. But I think that we can kind of separate some of the storytelling elements and then add in different cultural aspects as well. Or if you're going to associate different types of practices with a certain kind of culture, then you can go a little bit further, like, okay, well, why is it this way? Why is it going to be this kind of connection? So when it comes to maybe going about it the right, a better way, the right way, you know, what was the right way 10 years ago isn't the right way now. And 10 years from now, it could be a different right way, right? So we'll say maybe a more conscious or considerate way. You want to think about the perspective you're telling the story from. If you are telling the story from a perspective of an outsider watching and looking in, or someone who is experiencing this culture from a different cultural viewpoint, then you can explore it, and you can show the progression of that understanding as you go along. If me as a Filipino American want to tell a story from the perspective of, we'll even go East Asian, a Korean American, I'm not going to be able to tell that story well. I'm not going to be able to tell the story well from the perspective of someone from Ohio. I'm originally from Florida.
So sweet.
That's going to be very different. I didn't even know where y'all were from. I just threw that one out there because one of my very good friends is from Ohio, and we've been talking about Christmas and anyway, all of that. We talk about food differences a lot with our cultural standpoints as well. So being able to learn about cultural perspectives with an open mind, but then also speak to people. And if you can, invite people from that culture to take part in that creative process, whether it is from the beginning, saying, hey, I have this idea. I'm thinking about having this character being from this culture. Or I'm thinking about having the protagonist, antagonist being arranged in this way. What do you think of that? Are these types of things, is this behavior, is this word usage, is this type of custom accurate, appropriate? And even just starting with that. Because what we see a lot in terms of having maybe like opposing forces being from different cultures, think back to some of the old action movies where the villain was so often like British or Chinese. Add in some other flavors as well, some other examples, but a lot of them tended to fall in one of those one of those different categories. And you look back
Yeah.
on it now and you think, oh, that would not fly now.
No, and the worst part was the British actor playing someone Chinese.
Oh my word. Okay, we're not even going to talk about whitewashing.
It's interesting because a lot of the arguments against the kind of sensitivity or being accused of being woke is that there's an appeal to the heritage. Oh my goodness, a truck outside. You can see I'm in Florida.
I thought that was me breathing into the microphone right there.
The anti-woke mob is coming for me. The appeal to the history of the thing, where look at Flash Gordon and Ming the Merciless. It's like, oh, this is like as if it were a historical document, right? Like as if this were something. So much of the argument for me as a creator is as much it's cliche. As a creator, I don't want to do something. I mean, if all these things that are so terrible are also really, in some ways, lazy storytelling for me. It's like, if it's been seen a million times, why on earth would I want to do it again? So even people who are like friends of mine who are like the creators and they're trying to come up with something, I'm like, ooh, I mean, I can at least argue that's a cliche. You don't want to do it because it's been done a million times. It never should have been done in the first place, but come up with something new at the very least. And almost always, if you come up with something new, you're very rarely, I don't know, a person can't have that kind of allergic reaction to something that I don't think they've never, or they're not sent. They can't be. You're almost inoculating yourself from that kind of problem because it's a brand new thing. I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of logistical arguments in addition to being sensitive, in addition to being thoughtful, that you can appeal to creators. I find that I can appeal to creators with.
And that's a good way of going about it as well, because a lot of those cliches are based in stereotypes. And stereotypes, you can argue, well, some stereotypes do have some truth to them, but usually they're exaggerated in different ways, or they arise from a misinterpretation of a certain type of culture, or the way in which, here's an example, because we were talking a little bit about colonization and things of that nature as well, because when you think about how history is written, which communities, which groups of people typically produced the most examples of like documented history that's written down in the way where we will be able to access it, and in the way that's going to be the most commonly presented piece of information in schools. It's usually the people who were in power, to some degree being the colonizers, to some degree, history being written by the winners, whatever it may be. And 10 years ago, we didn't have that same variation in perspective. So 10 years ago, some of those stereotypes could have been derived from the way in which Group A saw Group B because of the position Group B was forced to be in due to different socioeconomic kinds of things, different cultural things, before globalization really flourished. So to them, to Group A, that's their truth. Group B doesn't really have a voice to be able to say anything otherwise. And if Group B starts acting in a way that does not fit with that interpretation that Group A is already familiar with, then that can also cause some problems. Because at the end of the day, we are human. We work within our own parameters of logic. Everyone has their own logic system, and you follow that logic system. And we like to gravitate towards things that are known, towards things that are comfortable, which is why we often surround ourselves with people who are similar in different ways, because we know how to act in that kind of environment. We know the rights and wrongs, the mores and norms and values. And going outside of that goes back to that primal desire for survival and safety, right? Be within your herd, within your tribe. Going outside of that is unknown. It's strange. You don't have a good understanding of it. So how will you know if something is good or bad? So it's normal to want to surround yourself with like-minded people and people who look the same as you, people who sound the same as you. But with the way the world is now and the different types of stories that are being told, we as creators, I think we have a responsibility to think about that perspective a little bit more and think about, well, who is the audience? Am I only writing things for people who already think like me? Or
Right.
do I want to expand a little bit? Or do I want to introduce different ideas to the people who do think like me and maybe help that community evolve in some
Yeah,
ways, you know?
for sure.
So think about your intent, thinking about your perspective as well. And who your audience is going to be will help you figure out how to navigate different cultural representation issues. Having inspiration from different cultures is totally fine. Another personal example. I love Thai food. I love Lebanese food. I'm going to learn how to make it, and I'm going to learn how to make it well. I'm not going to pretend to be like a Lebanese grandmother who has like the best food in the world. And if I go to a Lebanese restaurant, I'm not going to get offended if there are people who are not Lebanese in there. I think culture is beautiful when it's shared, and you can see how it's evolved and how other people can interpret things. But there's always that element of are you pulling on different bits of inspiration because it fits a stereotype, because it fits something that you already had in your mind? Are you cherry picking? Are you representing this culture from the perspective of an observer of that culture? Or are you
Right.
trying to make it feel natural? If you're trying to make it feel natural, and if you're trying to avoid falling into the same stereotype pitfalls, so think about different types of Asian food restaurants. How many Thai restaurants will have the words orchid in there, or
Right.
bamboo, or China Express, Panda Express,
Or that font,
You know?
that's like that.
that horrible font. Oh my word!
Uh-huh.
We all know the font.
Yeah, I know.
Yes. So if you want to represent things in a different way, I can't encourage enough talking to people or reading if you don't know anyone personally. And I would say that if you put something out on Twitter, if you like lean on the TTRPG network, again speaking from that creator standpoint, there are people out there. And there is a network to be found. I'm actually trying to compile together a roster of different people who are cultural sensitivity readers from different cultures.
Good.
So one of the projects coming up in the new year, I am part of a small team who is going to be unveiling a publishing company for indie TTRPG creators.
Nice.
Yes, Tattered Bear Publishing is going to be going live in 2023, and I'm so excited. I'll send you guys some more information for that promo as well.
Oh, perfect. And we'll have you back on and talk about that later.
Hey.
That's ready to go. Now,
But one of the services we want to provide is helping to link people up with cultural sensitivity readers, because there are plenty of people out there who would be willing to help, but I know it can be a little bit tricky to find sometimes.
Okay, I'm going to throw this at you. This is not my attempt to get your services for free, but this is it's a thing I've been working on.
Let me read my manuscript to you.
Yeah, here he goes. It was a dark and I've been playing around with a Western, and I don't mean Western as in society, but as in the old Wild West type of thing.
I love that genre.
Yeah.
I truly do.
But that is filled.
It is.
With traps.
Talk about pitfalls there.
Yeah. Let's say, I want to have it placed after a civil war.
Mm-hmm.
How is that navigate? I'm not going to ask you necessarily how to navigate. I'm going to ask you, is it navigatable? If I want, for lack of a better word, savages out in the, these are elements that make these Wild West stories fun, but they're not, let's just say, appropriate anymore.
So first, I wouldn't use the word savages.
Exactly. Yeah. No. I know they're lazy writers. Well, I'm just going to make them orcs. They're not Native Americans. They're orcs. That's just lazy.
You're making them non-human.
Exactly.
And when the primary perspective being shared in the story, if they are human, and you make the challenge, the opposition, non-human, then you're already stripping some of that away. Or if at least even if they're not D&D races, even if they are non-human race, if you are stripping away some of that humanity, if you're stripping away the things that make them relatable and interesting, you can still have opposition, but don't approach the representation of the other group, the other, the
Right.
in and out, as like degrading and things of that nature. I think that this, so I do love the Western genre, and we've been playing around a lot with some of our other content. We have been talking a lot about what makes the Western genre that genre. What are the defining characteristics of it? And I think you can actually pinpoint what those defining characteristics are without bringing race and culture into it right away. Because you're thinking about the wild frontier, venturing out, staking your claim to something. There's a little bit of, civilization versus wilderness in there as well. And very often, indigenous populations end up representing more of that side of wilderness, championing the natural world. And a lot of times in those Western stories, the sheriff, the cowboys, the people and the pioneers, and all of that, you're representing the establishment of some sort of civilization. So I think there's a lot you can do with that dynamic. And I think there's a lot you can do to represent different points of view in a way that doesn't necessarily villainize. If you can make a villain because of their actions versus a villain because of their association to a certain group, their association to a certain culture, then I think that helps. I don't know if that helps.
No,
I think it is. I think you can navigate that. You absolutely can. But think about what those themes actually are going to be.
Okay, and this is not just necessarily me, but any sort of writer. Let's just say,
absolutely.
Let's just say that the adventure, this scenario that is planned, is our group of adventurers seeking, I don't know, for lack of a better word, revenge or justice because I almost used that word, because the indigenous folks attacked out of anger, because of encroachment. I mean, will that automatically be seen as insensitive, or
it depends on how you approach it.
Mm-hmm. I'm not asking you for how to approach it, but it depends on how to be approached.
So this is a fantastic conversation to have, because I would say different societies around the world have had a lot of increased conversation socially, politically even, about indigenous rights and representing their voices in history. The US has been having those conversations. Canada, notably, has been having those conversations. Australia, New Zealand, everywhere. There are indigenous populations on every continent that are now being able to have some of those stories, some of those voices heard. And I think that if you were to explore or let the adventurers, if this is like a TTRPG kind of thing, notionally, right? If the adventurers are initially told, hey, we need to go and deal with this because they've attacked us, but then at some point over the course of the tale, they can learn why the attack happened, what led to this, because there's always a cause and effect. And there are multiple sides to any story. Some people will say 2 sides. Some people will say 3 sides. I'll say there are countless sides depending on who you talk to. We could all be looking at the same movie and have completely different interpretations of it, being from the same side, right? So it depends on how you present those actions and anger. Are they violent simply because they are the other? Usually not. That's like when you think about different stereotypes about Americans in general. Are we all closed-minded and brash? No. Are we all capitalistic? No. So are we all gun-toting? No. If you are, okay. If you're not, that's good too. So any sort of stereotype like that, or lumping an entire group of people into a certain short list of behaviors and characteristics, generally speaking, is a dangerous kind of play to make.
Okay, now a lot of what I'm saying here is just devil's advocate, not
Of course.
necessarily my views and what I believe in.
Mm.
Okay, so I'm running, and I've heard your thing, and I'm like, okay, I got my story about my Western D&D thing about the we're the antagonistic indigenous people. So can I just backspace a couple pages and then start? Okay, well, how about if this indigenous race asks this group of adventurers to help them against this other indigenous race just because those indigenous races are assholes? Is that lazy or?
I would say that.
I just don't want other writers.
Yeah. And honestly, that's a good example as well, because you see that in other conversations about race and culture too. Like, oh, well, people have been infighting for years. Well, yeah, okay, but that's also being seen through specific types of lenses, and then you're like justifying oppression and racism and all those different things. So I think that kind of story that kind of concept could still be told. And another exercise I would present to people is, okay, well, what if you changed the race? What if you changed the culture of these groups? What if it was a group of players coming from indigenous populations being asked to help these pioneers go against this pioneer village? Is it the same story? What kind of perspectives do you want to tell? And I think that, again, as long as you are not equating the behavior to a culture itself and to a race, because you can find very similar behaviors everywhere in every group of people. And I would again implore any creator who wants to explore this kind of thing to talk to people who do have those different perspectives. Because even when we think indigenous populations, there were hundreds of different Native American indigenous peoples. More than that, thousands? I don't know. I am not from that culture. So if I were going to approach this from, like, if I were hired on for this kind of thing, this kind of consultancy, one of the first things I would say would be, I can consult from a general cultural standpoint of how culture manifests, how different things evolve over time, what interactions may or may not be, how different things would impact people of different cultures. But if you want me to, and this is just like a general conversation that I would implore creators to have, if you want something that's very specific to a culture, you want something from someone from that culture. And any cultural sensitivity reader who tries to say they can do it all, they can't. Unfortunately, they can't. You don't have a one size fits all for this kind of thing. Go ahead.
Let me ask you this: are there certain topics at this point in our society and history that are just completely off limits? Slavery, prostitution, genocide. Is there any way that these evil elements, sex trade, human trafficking, are there any way these evil elements can be worked into a story without being insensitive? I don't know if that's an answerable question.
And to a degree, yes. So I've had this question raised a lot in the context of the family-friendly game design. How do you handle different themes that point towards the darker parts of society and history, the darker parts of our communities, in a way that is age appropriate, in a way that is sensitive, in a way that is still understanding of the impact of these different things? How do you convey that to different audiences? And I think that these topics can be discussed, and if it's done the right way, I would encourage certain things to be discussed if it's done the right way. Right. If you can approach these topics and say, you know what, there is a problem with human trafficking in this city. This is a very real thing. This happens on every continent, unfortunately. in reality. Let's see what we can discuss with this. Are you championing it? Are you excusing it? Are you ignoring it? Saying, well, that's just part of life.
Or exploiting it.
Or exploiting it.
Yeah.
And that goes into a debate of morality. What is right and wrong? What kind of message are you trying to convey to your audiences? Are you going to ignore it and say, well, man, that's crap. That's real shitty. Oh boy. Guess we're going off to the tavern. That doesn't involve me. Let's not get involved. Because that is a conversation that happens a lot too. Is the bystander effect. How does that come into play? If are people who see things but then are silent about it, are they also guilty if they don't do something about it? So it when it comes to D&D, when it comes to these types of games, we like to feel like we are heroes, we are proponents of something. We can make a change in the world, and that's something that people love about this hobby. That's something I love about this hobby. If I can go in somewhere and bust something up like that, bust up a human trafficking ring or take down injustice of some sort, if I can feel, even just for a few hours over a weekend, like I can make a difference with something in a way that in our day-to-day lives, maybe we don't always feel that way. That's something that people get excited about and they get drawn into. And that's a story that people would like to be part of. So if that's the kind of experience you want to have for your players, you want to think about what kind of things are acceptable, what kind of things are not acceptable. And you can represent that in a variety of different ways in the NPCs, in the bystanders. You could have NPCs who go, that's none of my business. You could have NPCs who go, no, that's my cousin was taken. This is terrifying. This happens. This is right on our doorstep. You can have NPCs who go, yeah, well, they deserved it. They were asking for it. You can have different perspectives presented, but how are you going to handle that as a creator? How are you going to handle that as a writer and as a storyteller? What kind of message are you trying to convey for your players as well? And again, if you were to switch races and ethnicities and cultures around and kind of shuffle them, would it still be a riveting story? If yes, then that tells me that you have not inherently linked different cultural representation to certain types of behaviors and negative messages. But if suddenly it doesn't become believable anymore, got to ask yourself, okay, well, why is that? What did I inherently code? Because cultural coding is also another thing.
Yeah.
I think you can talk about these things if you think about the bigger picture of it, too.
Just point me to the master list of what I can do and can't do.
I can't. There doesn't exist.
Well, that was one of the things that Dan, we talked about this before. But I think the feeling is that anything that can be interpreted poorly will be interpreted poorly, right? There's not going to, but that's not an excuse not to try. That seems to be the pitfall that a lot of creators find themselves in. It's like, well, if everything I'm going to do is going to be poorly interpreted, why should I bother? And why can't I just use all the cliche tropes that and not only that, they're like 15th generation tropes. So it's like they started off as like barely informed and they got less informed along the way to the point where now, the time we've inherited them from media, they're like, it's so distant.
There are things that you can do. So for smaller creators who maybe don't have the budget to bring on a cultural editor, who maybe don't have the budget for consultancy, or in the early stages at least, and maybe they're not there yet, consume media that's written in those perspectives. Don't just read the Wikipedia article. Don't just read Encyclopedia Britannica or whatever it may be, written from the perspective of only one myopic viewpoint. There are so many different examples of music, of art, of books, of film, of games that are written by people from these different cultures. Listen to the diverse voices that are out there, that do exist. Start trying to understand that this history has many different sides to it, and there are many different interpretations. So when it comes to Western, look for indigenous stories. They don't just have to be game creators. There are so many more books and pieces of media that are starting to surface. And even just starting to understand, oh, this cliche arose because of this, like for this reason. But there are also all of these other different things going on behind this story as well. So consuming that content in some way will really set you up for a good approach to your story earlier on.
That's great. That's great.
Let me ask you this on the creator side. Okay, again, middle-aged white hetero white dude here. I want to create an adventure, but I kind of feel, again, maybe, okay, well, if I'm going to attract an audience, or if I'm going to expand my fan base, I see where things are going. Should I write something I'm comfortable with, or should I not necessarily, being insensitive to any culture at all, just something that's, I'm comfortable with? Or do I navigate those waters and throw in my, hero, my gay African-American hero from, raised orphan, do I try to cram different cultural things in there to get, to present myself as, yeah, I'm woke. I'm open to
shoehorning.
Yeah.
The Captain Planeting it. I think it's what's called.
Oh,
that's what I'm trying. I need Steve here to translate what I'm saying.
All good. So people can smell shoehorning from a mile away, from miles, yards, nautical miles, light years, because you can see when someone is the token character, and when creators are checking a box, and even if it's well intentioned, they didn't fully do their homework. It's like copying answers for a test, copying answers for homework in school. You're getting the general idea of it, but you didn't exactly figure out how you got an answer of like 6.37 after all of these calculations.
I didn't show my work.
And I hated math, right? Defying those Asian stereotypes. I hate math. Psychology, writing. So shoehorning runs the risk of, while you may have checked a certain box, you're not actually representing cultures. And the stereotypes, that pitfall is going to be there. And people will feel, they'll see it and they'll think this feels dishonest. This feels like, the Walmart version of whatever, the wish.com version of whatever it was meant to be. And nothing against Walmart. I have been in many, many Walmarts over the years.
No, my Catacombs and Comedians has been called the wish.com version of Critical Role. So I'm fine with it.
And we want to be sensitive to Walmart shoppers. We want to
be sensitive to Walmart shoppers. Man, nothing wrong with Walmart. Love a good neighborhood Walmart. But yeah, but you know what I mean? Like the watered down, the kind of, someone has described this once to me. Like if someone who's never seen a horse before, and then they try to draw a horse.
Yeah.
So if it's a choice between trying to check a box to give the impression of diversity and then writing what you know, you might end up doing more damage trying to just check a box. If you want to have diverse representation, which is absolutely good, yes, you've got to do your homework. Unfortunately, there is no easy way around it, because at the end of the day, you can't click a button and go, okay, I now have understanding of a vast range of cultural experiences overnight.
Well, I don't
Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way.
we might have cultural sensitivity AI readers any minute now with the art and the writing that's happening. So.
Oh no!
Well, I would think that might be one of the last things the AI could get right. There's one of the things that we talk as an artist. One of the things they talk about is that in Scott McCloud's book, in Understanding Comics, it's like he talks about drawing an apple and how the outside of the apple has a sheen to it, but you really requires understanding the structure of a thing. And so if you're drawing a person, knowing how the skeleton is put together and then how the musculature is put together, and then you put the skin on top. A lot of these problems is when the people are just applying the skin and they have no understanding of the structure. They have no understanding of what made the structure what it is, or made the outside look the way it does. So to me, it's like if you're just applying the skin to it, if you're just applying the texture pattern to a thing and not thinking about how it's constructed, I feel like that's where, at least in some of my early thoughts on, and certainly my early writing was absolutely littered with that kind of, okay, this guy's got an afro, therefore, boom, it's sort of like it's just not
it does
thoughtful.
More harm. It does more harm than good, because it will further show your viewers, the audiences, that, okay, they still don't understand us. Really?
Right.
This is how you are defining representation. So there's someone in the chat, It Be Riley. Hello, Riley. Riley is one of my editors for Bard RPG. And we talk about this kind of stuff a lot in the Scribbler world, in the Scribbler fam. So I absolutely agree with what they said. Is it relevant? That's the biggest question. Is it relevant that your protagonist is Black, LGBTQ, orphan, etc.? If you can change those aspects and the story is the same, then don't do it. Right? So that's something that we discussed before. Can you switch things around? Are you looking for the story elements, or are you looking to check boxes of representation? So there are different schools of thought with that. Yeah. Thank you, Riley.
But as a creator, let's say I wanted to explore those realms. I mean, I wrote a story of a 14-year-old girl. I am no 14-year-old girl, obviously. But, is that off limits to me because of who I am?
It's not off limits if you go through the process of trying to understand that perspective. If you've got siblings, daughters, nieces, people in the family that you can talk to. It's not one of those things. What's that meme? What's that gif? Hello, fellow youths.
Yeah. So I just
what's shaken?
I just can't watch Degrassi Next Generation and move on.
Not quite. You need to have that research. And research. Nothing is off limits if you do the research and you do it with an open mind and with the right perspective.
So you're telling me not only do I have to research these cultures, I've got to, and on top of that, I got to make sure my game mechanics work.
That's all. Right? That's all. No one said this was easy. So, no one said this was easy. And run it by a 14-year-old girl, for goodness sakes.
And not to mention I can't
market research.
And I got to make sure I'm not writing in the past tense all the time. So.
You know what? Yes. I will be that hard ass. Exploring different perspectives is good. It's good. And it's a win-win situation, because yes, it may add some more hours to the production of a thing, but in the end, you have enhanced and expanded your knowledge and understanding. You will be able to relate to different people from different perspectives and cultural backgrounds a little bit better than you did before. And it will show. It will show in the end product. So you'll take something that could have easily fallen into the pitfalls of checking boxes or misrepresentation, generalization, reinforcing harmful stereotypes. But now you have something that is more well-informed. And if you can have people reading it who are part of your team, and please make sure that you treat sensitivity readers as part of the team and not an antagonizing presence. I am professing that out to the interwebs. Please, we are part of your team. We want to be part of this process because we want to make sure that we help your stories become the best thing that they could be. We want to see you succeed. And we also are very, very passionate about making sure that different voices are heard and people are listened to. When I saw Raya and the First Dragon come out from Disney, I cried because we didn't have a Pacific Islander, a Southeast Asian Disney princess before. And it was amazing. Are there things that could have been done better? Sure. But you know what? You look at the cast. You look at the people who are involved with that. You look at Encanto. You look at the people who are involved with bringing that to life and the people who are consulting. And they got the right people. They did their research. And you can see that on small scale projects as well. It's a fantastic, amazing thing. And it does make a difference. And I think that pays dividends because you do the research, you present something, you explore a new concept that maybe you haven't presented before. That's going to make a difference for someone who's out there seeing it and who's reading it. Even if they never have a chance to get people together to sit down and play the game because scheduling's a bitch. It's still there and it means a lot. We're going to make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. It's normal. And even within different cultures, there are different interpretations. There are hundreds of different ethnic groups within the Philippines. So you can't generalize an entire community, right? You can't say all American barbecue is the same. Like hell it is.
Yeah. I've learned that moving from Southern California to Nashville.
Right. So many different things. But it does pay off. Don't be afraid to make those mistakes as long as you're willing to listen to the right voices to then move beyond them and keep improving.
And I would bet too, but having the work working with a sensitivity reader would also probably give a product a longer shelf life. It'll probably age quite a bit better. So I mean, there's seems to be commercial reasons for publishers to work with you.
Mm-hmm. It's in everyone's best interest, to be honest. Yeah, it absolutely is. And sensitivity readers, you want to make sure you include that in your project budget as well. So people who are going to Kickstarter, people who are trying to fund the creation of your game, consider your editors. Truly, there are people out there who will help, out of the goodness of their hearts. But it's a rough world out there. It is work, and we can't live off of exposure. But in that front end, there is a lot of research you can do for free for yourself. I think that's a good first step. And it'll make all the difference. And it does make it does expand the shelf life. We were talking about Indiana Jones earlier.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Off stream. I'd love to bring that up now. If that's okay.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Indiana Jones. I loved Indiana Jones growing up. I thought it was so cool. It made like art and history and different cultural artifacts and things seem so freaking badass.
I saw Raiders of the Lost Ark 18 times in the theater. In the theater.
It's impactful.
Yes.
Right? That it was it characterizes a whole form of media, just a generation. It's amazing. You look at it now though, some of the biggest thieves out there are museums.
Yeah.
But we know that now because people did their research.
We were having that discussion
because they listened to the voices.
And I was telling Scriv this, that the other night I was laying awake because the line "It belongs in a museum" was keeping me up. Because you cannot say that now, but 10 years ago, or when 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when The Last Crusade came out, he was sprouting that line all the time. It belongs in the museum, or so. Mm-hmm. As
Crusades, that's another thing too, but we can't talk about that right now.
Now I'm looking at is Indiana Jones a bad guy because of this, and he's obviously not. So, but does punching Nazis just alleviate, the fact that he's a
I
great
think we can
father.
all get behind punching Nazis.
Yeah.
That's okay.
And I'd want to think he's like stopping it from being in a private collection where it's hidden behind a wall and something is just owned by somebody and hidden as this piece of private property that they have all to themselves. If the notion of a museum as a public place, as a shared community, returning an artifact to a museum in repatriation to a museum versus repatriation to an oligarch's private sanctum. I think there's room for these characters to exist in the future. You just have to think about I don't know, it's just, I'm sorry,
who are you hoarding it for?
But
right who are you returning it to?
To defend Indiana Jones, he did return the stones to the village in Temple of Doom.
People can change. See, there's an example.
But that was a prequel,
right?
So he changed from good guy to bad guy.
Here's another movie he could save himself. He's got one more movie.
We need a redemption arc for Indy. But Indy was operating under a certain frame of understanding, right? And now we know that was not the right frame of understanding. When you take culturally significant artifacts, when you take that cultural property from a community and you put it over here for the enjoyment of everyone else, you can say, oh yeah, but look, we are allowing other people to learn about your culture. Okay, but you stole from us. Yes, but look, it's for education and building understanding. Yeah, but you stole, and how are we benefiting from it? Oh, by the way, you're still stealing. You see my backyard? You see my backyard out there? My cousin said you took all this stuff. Can we have it back now? No, we're still looking at it. I can't remember which stand-up comedian that was who did just a fantastic little bit about the British Museum. Hey, can we have our books back? No. Well, why not? We're looking at them still. What? Okay, well, can I come in and look at it? Sure, but you have to pay us.
Right.
Oh, goodness. So I love the spirit of it, but we have a better understanding now. If you're going to show representation of a certain culture, who's it really for? Right. And are you acknowledging the different perspectives connected to that culture? Research.
Is what it comes down to. It comes down to research and hiring a sensitivity reader. Yes. No matter how small the project.
Well, I also think there are proactive steps we can take. Also, just the idea of avoiding these cliches. I mean, so much of it, and you just look at it, it's like it's cringy because not just from a cultural standpoint, from a creative standpoint. I feel like almost all the things we talk about that the opening credits of Critical Role, where they were dressed as the explorers and colonialists, which they got flack for and immediately changed. I thought that was the right move. I thought changing it, just okay, our bad. Let's be better. But it was a cliche, and I think that's a red flag for me. Whenever I'm finding myself creating something or writing something and I see something, I've seen that more than 10 times in my life. I'm like, ooh, that's probably, I got to double check that, triple check that.
Yeah, because chances are that's going to be reinforcing a harmful stereotype in some way. And even just, you can avoid a lot of this even just by keeping your finger on the pulse of the community and what those big topics are. Decolonization is such a significant conversation that's happening right now. So as a result of that, there is a whole wealth of resources out there that you can dive into to start to understand why that is an issue and the lasting impacts of different historic events on communities that we still see generations upon generations later. So I absolutely understand, project budgeting. I do. Absolutely do. But you have to ask yourself as a creator, am I willing to cut corners and reinforce a harmful stereotype and take because it's easy and potentially add to the problem later on? Because you're right, it is hard. It is, but it's not inaccessible. In fact, cultural understanding is becoming more and more accessible as we go on. And honestly, I made a joke about Wikipedia earlier, but Wikipedia research has actually gotten pretty darn good over time because the editing and the resources, the works cited, the reference pages for these things are amazing. Not to give free advertising or whatever. But yeah, it can be done. And there are ways to approach this regardless of what your project budget is.
That's great.
That's great. Something so profound to say, and I forgot what it was. So.
It'll come to you. You got to chase it.
Yeah. So what it comes down to is, let's call it as creators, we need to take responsibility for what we produce. And if you choose to ignore certain elements, it's your fault if you get bit on the ass.
You've got to take ownership of it. Yeah. And that's cultural sensitivity. That's looking at things from a disability and mental health standpoint as well, neurodivergence and history. So again, seeing a comment from Riley talking about historical consultation as well. So you mentioned a civil war earlier. If you wanted to have like a civil war kind of aspect, tell me one country who has not had a civil war at some point during their history. And there are patterns.
But it's fantasy. Why do I need to rely on history? It's fantasy.
If you're trying to tell a story that in any way involves humans, humanoids, a human interpretation of something, if you're a human yourself writing it, you've got to know our history. You've got to consider the way societies work, the way people evolve, what drives change, what drives anger, what drives that desire for rising up against something. So you can have a completely fantastical world, but if you're talking about war, if you're talking about suffering, if you're talking about any of these things, if you're writing for humans, sorry, there's no way around
it. That's my primary demographic.
Well, now
are humans in your demographic.
We're also going to have AI readers, so I just write for the AI readers, and
AI is programmed by
Sadly,
who? Who programs the AI?
Everything's
Who feeds AI information?
Sadly, there aren't AI customers.
I want to thank you, Scriv. Thank you so much for showing up and enlightening us, and sharing your knowledge with us. We will definitely have you back. Without trying to sneak in our own, agendas.
I don't mind it at all. This has been great fun.
This is the part of the program where you plug everything you need to plug.
Oh boy. Work with sensitivity readers. Pay your editors. Do your research in terms of things to plug. I actually am getting ready for a big charity streaming event this week. It's called Scribbler Hug 2022. It's something we try to do every year. So that will probably be my biggest thing to plug right now. So from the 21st to the 22nd, I'm going to be live streaming a variety of different types of content, from gaming to live art, game design, creator chat, one-shots, supported by a whole team of wonderful, wonderful people raising money for two organizations, War Child, who helps children and their families who have been impacted by conflict, whether they're still in a war zone or whether they have been displaced. Right now, one of their main campaign fundraising areas is helping children from Ukraine. And also working with Become, an organization that offers support and resources to children in the care system, the foster care system, from very young into that transitional stage where they are moving out of the care system. Right now, they're trying to work on ending what's called the care cliff. So once you leave the system, suddenly you have that drop off, right? And then you're left stranded without support. They're trying to stop that through updating their programs and outreach, talking to policymakers, and so on and so forth. A lot of very specialized programs for the holidays. So those are the two organizations that we're going to be raising money for this week. And yeah, that's the main thing I would like to plug. please
Perfect.
tune in on my own Twitch channel and follow me on Twitter for more.
And what is your Twitch channel's? Is it Scriv the
Scriv
Bard?
the Bard. Yep, I am
Sweet.
Scriv the Bard everywhere.
Sweet.
And there's not one Scriv the Bard 01 anywhere that you had to
There
use?
better not be. With all the spoof accounts on Twitter, I've been checking like on a weekly basis just to make sure.
All right. Well, next Sunday is the Christmas here in the States and around the
Yeah.
world. So Steve and I will be taking that Sunday off, and we'll see you again in the. Let's see, is December 1st? Is that on a Sunday? I mean, January 1st. Is that on a Sunday? No, that's
That's a whole year away. I don't know.
So Steve and I will probably be back January 2nd, I believe. I mean, I'm sitting in front of a computer. I can look it up real quick. Yeah.
We have the technology.
January 1st. Are you going to be hungover, or should we stream on January 1st?
I'm available. Come on,
Okay.
New Year.
I think I'm available too. All right.
Yeah, we're gonna hit the ground running.
All right. Yeah, we're going to start.
Yeah.
We'll talk about our plans for 2023, Dan.
Oh God.
Make that your New Year's resolution, to be awake on the 1st for a stream.
All right. So
Might be a bit of a stretch
if
for
you're
me.
watching this on demand video or the YouTube or whatever, Steve and I will be back January 1st, hitting 23 running out of the gate. Being excited about all our new projects and your new projects, everybody out there creating. We're going to have more guests in the coming year. And again, big thanks to Scriv the Bard. We'll have you back. Definitely talk about stuff. You were
Thank you
a
so
delight
much. This
and a
was
joy and very knowledgeable. And we appreciate everything you gave us. So until then, folks, be good to each other and may you make all of your saving throws.
Happy birthday, Dan.
Thank you.
Happy birthday. Bye, everyone.